Welcome back to Last Month in Security. We've got a very special guest, Richard Stiennon, joining us, who's from IT Harvest. Richard, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself and IT Harvest and everything you got going on.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. There's a lot going on. So IT Harvest is my industry analyst firm that I started when I left Gartner. And you tell from the name, I'm very interested in data. I wanted to harvest all the data on the cybersecurity industry. I've been working towards that for 18, 19 years. And a couple of years ago, we launched a platform to make that data accessible to subscribers. So now find myself launching a SaaS company.
No, always very busy every time I talk to you. Also joining us today on our panel, Stacey Cameron. She's the Halcyon's CISO, and Ben Carr, my usual cohort here, Halcyon's Chief Security and Trust Officer. So, Stacey, Ben, welcome. Thanks for joining. I'm just going to jump right into this because time is always something that none of us have enough of. So, back in I think late December, early January, President Biden, before he left office, issued an executive order. We haven't had one of those around cybersecurity for quite a while. In fact, I would say not a lot was done during the Biden administration around cybersecurity, except for we saw the growth of CISA for sure, and a lot of the activity that we're doing there. There was a lot of kind of house claiming in the executive order, but two things that really stood out to me. One was the Secure by Design initiatives, which is kind of putting a little bit more of the impetus back onto the providers, the solution providers, application developers, and stuff to make sure that their products are secure before they get out into market. Um, and the other thing that really kind of stood out was some of the things around ransomware, which we can get to next. But Secure by Design, obviously, at a glance, that's something we would all agree. There's something things need to be QA'd, things need to be pen tested, things need to be vulnerability free as they can be before they get out to market and stuff. Why do you think we needed this included in an executive order, and why isn't this something that we're just seeing the industry by now, this many years into computing, that we're not seeing this just kind of be an automatic thing? Because obviously if there's a vulnerability, if there's a breach that's caused by a solution provider and application, it reflects poorly on them, right? So doesn't it seem like there'd be, like, Richard, some impetus for them to already kind of do this as a self-serving thing?
You would think, but it's never ever been the case. And from early days, if you put your head in the mind of a product developer or a startup with a product, why in the world should you add all these additional cycles to the development cycle, right? Where you already have, we're building a product, we're going through unit testing, finding bugs and things that have to be changed and feeding them back. So there's already this very expensive loop and time-consuming loop, and you're really saying, "Hey, we should put a security check in there," but, it's just an MVP. We haven't launched yet. Why do we even care? Nobody's gonna attack it. So that's just human nature. Don't spend money until you have to. Don't and, if you build a house, you're gonna wait until after it's done before you think about putting bars on the windows. So I think it's totally natural. It doesn't surprise me. Now, it's also totally natural for a relatively new group coming in, like CISA was, because CISA was stood up during the Trump administration, and Biden took it over, and we got Jen Easterly, who, great
Fantastic
example.
about it.
Yeah, great example of, a good leader, yet not really understanding the cybersecurity world, right? And being a little naive, as a matter of fact, in that they think that the role of government is to tell us to patch our systems. Because you would think everybody would patch their systems because, if you got to do that. But no, that's not the case, because patching systems is very, very difficult and very disruptive to business operations. So all
Richard, are
this,
you saying that people actually don't patch stuff? That's news to me. I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, and I get that from CISOs who, are sitting on, a million open vulnerabilities,
Yeah.
and they tell me flat out they would not even have a vulnerability management solution or process if it weren't for the regulatory requirements to do so, because it's just too overwhelming, right? And they just can't patch everything, so why bother kind of thing. Same with secure by design. So I think it was nice on the way out for the White House and CISA in particular to kind of put a stake in the ground. Things should be secure by design, and here's some processes and things you should do, etc. But it's also pie in the sky and is never ever going to happen.
So Richard, like I'm interested, like when you talk about that and the timing, I thought the timing of that was really strange, interesting, strange, because it was right at the very end, right? And if you really want to make a difference, don't you do that on the front side of the administration where then you can actually have a runway to get something done or changed versus at the end it seems like I don't know, an empty promise, right? Like, yeah, we're going to do something but we know it's not going to have any teeth in it.
Right. With any change at the end of an administration, it's like that. But don't forget, and Anthony, I have to disagree with you. The Biden administration started with executive orders on cyber policy that finally pulled things together. I mean, every administration has had a EO on cyber policy, but the one that came out in the early Biden White House had real teeth to it. It finally stepped away from risk management principles, which every single policy from the White House has had since before Biden, even back to the Bush era. They took a more proactive approach to security than has ever been done before. So they started out with that, and CISA grew on that, and this was kind of their maybe it was their last minute. Um, oh my gosh, we've been working on this. We got to get it out the door.
Interesting. So I'm kind of curious, like Stacey, from your point of view, um, you know, it seems, especially around the ransomware issue, that the government just can't really do much about it. They haven't really figured out how to do very much about it. We get some occasional indictments out of the DOJ. We get more, standards and frameworks and suggestions on how to, conduct cybersecurity programs and stuff. Um, but it seems like they're really kind of putting a lot of sticks towards instead of carrots towards the end users who are usually the victims, right? The organizations who are being attacked, and then saying, "Well, you're attacked, then we're gonna drop a bunch of extra regulations on you," which we know tend to distract from actual efficacy in security programs because we had to gear resources towards checkbox compliance. So to Richard's point, how do you kind of see that early EO from the Biden administration and up to this last one that includes the secure by design?
Yeah, so a lot of times when you're looking at when the government put things out, so the government put out security controls, right? So they're like, we're gonna go, we have FISMA, we need you to follow some security controls. We're gonna have NIST do this, we're gonna have NIST work with industry, academia, and come out with these standards, right? So, but then you put it under compliance regulations. So then you have those that are just doing things to focus on compliance of certain aspects of what the government is recommending. Then you're bringing these EOs that are being addressed. They're addressing things that are specific, right? So they're addressing things that are growing within supply chain attacks. Things are growing with ransomware attacks. And to me, it's focusing now. It's going to focus more on the actual security aspect of it, and not just so much as focus on a regulatory component of it, where you miss some of those security components. So I think and like you're saying, I think Richard said, yeah, that sometimes it's just not always going to happen. But what you want to do is you're bringing in not just government, but you're trying to get the government to work with private and public sector to the ones that are actually in the weeds of the things of everything that's happening in the throes and having to deal with this. So it's not just putting the emphasis and as you said, the stick to the victims, but let's get the ones that have some of that knowledge and bring it in so it's not just one directional. And so again, I think the heart is in it, right? Everyone means well, but what are you going to do with it, right? So you came out with EO 14028 that's talking about zero trust, right? So and now this order is actually supposed to expand on that to really go into the details. Okay, yes, do that, but now I want you to do this specifically. I need you to focus on your S bombs. I need you to focus on this actual aspect of things to give a little bit more direction. So instead of just giving you bake a cake, let me help you with the recipe a little bit. So I think that it's going in a good place, but it's still up to the the end users, the vendors, the SaaS providers, those to really take it and interpret it and then work with it. But now you kind of have that federal backing behind you to say, okay, you need to be doing something.
And don't forget, the greatest lever that the federal government has is to require better security from federal agencies. And, even though CISA and the White House don't have much pull with the Defense Department, they are the ones that most need security by design. We had 10 major weapon systems developed in the 80s and 90s that the Chinese were able to steal all of the design components of in the famous hack against the DIB. And since then, there have been several new weapons, not several, one new weapon systems funded or given approval. And the hope is that they are building security into the long-range bomber. I hope that's the case because it'll be 20 years before that bomber sees the light of day, and think there are going to be some pretty sophisticated attack methodologies against airplanes by then.
So do
Well,
you
and this,
actually have confidence in that though, Richard? Like when I look at what the government's done, like, and it's not an easy problem to solve. I don't mean to cast all aspersions and problems at the government, like not wanting to do things. I think they do generally, right? I think the challenge is it's massive, right? And you have so many different agencies that just generally, you've got conflicts and things that come up. In my life, I think, the conflict between the CIO and the CISO, right? There's just a native friction that exists there. That's a native thing that exists between, FBI, CIA, NSA. Like there's just a natural, friction and disconnect there. But then I see things like, the appointment of the National Cyber Director, Sean Cairncross. Like he's a lawyer. Like he's got no cyber background. That's a strange one for me. And I get disheartened when things like that happen. And I don't think it's not related necessarily to the administration. We see that just happen all the time. Like people who shouldn't be appointed these positions are appointed for political appointments. And it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, imagine if you're in the Foreign Service and you're seeing all these idiots being appointed as your ambassador that you have to treat with respect.
Yeah.
It would be very upsetting, which is not totally a Trump thing. Ambassadorships have been gravy to donors since the country was founded.
Yeah, it's a campaign reward, right? Like that's generally what ambassadors are.
Completely annoying when that happens. I think the first of all, the government doesn't have the control over security stance of the country, right? It's not there. They spent the first decade of the 2000s, fighting over who was responsible for securing the country. And they kind of decided, okay, DHS on the commercial side and the Defense Department, NSA on the, nation state side. And yet they still can't defend a state, right? State of Michigan, it's got nothing if it's under attack. They were all waiting for somebody to protect them, and there hasn't been any spending on it, and there hasn't been any direction on it.
well, that's where we kind of see a lot of this, when the government can't do much against the threat actors, but they can go after the victims, right? And we're also seeing, the lawsuits and stuff pile on. This is particularly a problem with ransomware. So if we draw, a little attention to what was in the EO about ransomware. So we've got some enhanced sanctioning authority, ability to go after money and assets, which I think they pretty much already kind of had that based on previous executive orders, laws that were already in place.
Are you going to pull the thread on terrorism now, Anthony? Is that where you're headed with this again?
No, I'm not going to head there. But I'm just curious, does it seem like we're, and we've talked about this a lot, are we doing enough? Was there enough in this EO to make a difference? Promoting AI technologies, but I didn't really see anything in there to really incentivize the free market to accelerate these technologies. They're just saying it's a good idea to start using them. We're getting our lunch eaten by ransomware operators, and this just seems like the very minimal kind of it's just hot air, right? For the most part.
Yep. Yeah, not going to have an impact. It's almost moot now because it's a new administration. Anything done before is like automatically viewed with suspicion, and the knee-jerk reaction is to cancel it. And one of the most important things that came out of the EO that Stacey was talking about was this cyber safety review board, right? That, finally there's going to be a group of experts that look at the right thing. And unfortunately, that was somehow bizarrely corrupted almost from day one. It's like the cyber safety review board was conceived to address the SolarWinds attack, right? Which was that needs explanation, needs, somebody to come in and look at all the details and tell us what happened and where we went wrong. And they opted not to review the very thing that caused them to be formed, and instead talked about Log4j. A vulnerability, we already understand that. You can summarize that in a paragraph and what to do about it. Not a sophisticated attack. So that's gone. Those guys have all been told to pack their bags, and any other types of things like that. I mean, it is literally, free for all within the federal government right now. Everybody's worried about their jobs. Those that aren't worried about their jobs are also not worried about oversight from lawyers, and are, just going to have their way with what they have.
Well, that's it. I mean, how many proposed legislation have we seen over the last, say, 15 years? Bills that have never made it through. Healthcare is particularly getting hammered by ransomware. We did see a fairly sound piece of legislation go through to enhance cybersecurity for the healthcare field, and it quickly died. Right.
My first experience on the Hill, I was at WebRoot, so I was kind of, touching on government relations. So I went to the very first vote on a national breach disclosure law in 2005. Every session of Congress since, there's been a breach disclosure law proposed, and they've never able to get it because Microsoft in particular tends to water it down to the point where it's not as stringent as either Massachusetts or Washington State or California. So it's pointless, right? Everybody's got to comply with the most stringent requirement, not the least stringent one. So yeah, it's amazing how government works.
Well, that maybe Microsoft has too big a seat at the table for these kinds of conversations. Then
Sure do.
you could make the analogy that they're now that they offer security services as well, that they're the arsonist and the firefighter, right?
That's right.
Because as they introduce more vulnerabilities that are actively exploited than any other
We all have to
provider
thank them
ever.
we have to thank them for creating the industry that we're all in. It literally wouldn't exist if Microsoft hadn't, owned the server, the desktop, and gaming systems, and then an attempt at the phone, which thankfully they failed at, and they failed ultimately at the server. So thank God we've got Linux now. But man, when I was selling Solera against them, it was frustrating.
I think you were talking about the Cyber Safety Review Board, with that being modeled sort of after the NTSB's board, right?
Oh.
And I used to work for NTSB, by the way.
It's really cool. Cool.
So it's interesting. So a lot of things that even within NTSB, within like safety recommendations and all these things that are coming out of there, it some things didn't really have teeth, right? So they have all these recommendations, but they have pretty much not much enforcement directly within that particular area. Is that something similar, even though it's been modeled after that, that you're seeing from that with the Cyber Safety Review Board?
Yeah, I was during the Obama administration, I was invited to a brainstorming session hosted by the National Science Foundation. And that was one of 5 recommendations that we came up with, which was to create the Cyber Safety Review Board. And, you know, I think because the other, the participants in that brainstorming felt frustrated because we're blind, right? We don't know what happened, right? We don't know what happened at Sony, right? Which was, other than that Obama stepped in and all of a sudden there was a agreement with President Xi, which I want to remind everybody every time I mention it, that we've never seen that agreement. There's just a statement on the whitehouse.gov that says there's an agreement, and lo and behold, hacking from China went away for a period of years. Would have been nice to know what that agreement was, so we'd hold Xi's feet to the fire for breaking it. So we ended up with what we had today. Yeah, I don't think. We can't wait for the government to fix anything for us, especially at this point, right? Government really has its own problems all of a sudden. It's all going to rely on our individual and corporate ability to defend ourselves. And we know it's possible. It costs a lot. It's super expensive, but there are organizations, and I like to think of Lockheed Martin as one of them, that can withstand the most sophisticated attack coming from China and Russia, and they do every day. And so now I'm not saying every organization will be able to spend as much as they do, but vendors will provide them with the tools to make it possible to have the same level of defense.
Well, that's an interesting place to segue a little bit. Talking about these nation state actors. You are an author of several books. Surviving Cyber War, There Will Be Cyber War. You wrote those books kind of when there hadn't been a lot of discussion about cyber warfare. We had designated cyber as a theater of operations. We do have some policies in place that say, there is certain circumstances where a cyber attack could elicit a kinetic response, right? So everything's on the table still. Yet we've never really called anything an act of cyber warfare yet, right? That regardless of how serious the intrusion was from particularly China, Russia, and then secondarily North Korea, Iran. What does it take to cross that line? Have we really defined that, do you think? And to your point about the agreement we don't know about with Xi, what do you think might have been in there? And could that document hold more clues as to, where that threshold is for us?
If there were a document, not just a handshake, I think there would hold more clues. And don't forget that President Obama did say it was an act of war with the Sony entertainment systems attack. But the military is the one who, has the ability to say if it was an attack that warranted moving to kinetic in response. They can do that. They can still do that. You could argue whether or not they have done that, but don't forget it's really difficult for an attacker to talk about cyber or anything, is they don't want to reveal what they know or what their methods are. And I think right now the United States actually has the upper hand in the cyber battlefield, just across every level. They dominate it. So and you have to keep that in mind when you do see the attacks that get through, the ones from Russia, China, DPRK, and Iran, that the NSA knows about them beforehand. But it can't necessarily do anything because it would reveal how much they know. So just kind of always keep that in the back of your mind.
But isn't that a little bit of the devil's advocate bargain there of like, yeah, okay, like we're better than they are, yet we by definition aren't doing anything about it really, right? Like, I mean, I think there's a lot of activity that's happening. Like we see it on the ransomware space, obviously, but we see it in other areas as well, where threat actors are doing malicious activity. Corporations are expected to defend, but they're handicapped on, anything active. The U.S. government doesn't really want to do anything because they don't want to go kinetic, because where does that then end, right? Like, where's the return on the kinetic response? So it kind of seems like a both hands are tying you behind your back situation of not really being able to do anything. Yeah, we can call it war, but we really don't that often, and nothing happens as a result of it, right? So
Yep. Oh, it's a classic example of the executive branch having to direct the military and the intelligence community. And, that hasn't happened at that level yet in cyber. It's funny when we talk about the conflict in Ukraine and how it led to, obviously, cyber war occurring in theater there, leaving out not Petya, which occurred in that time frame. The I shocked people when asked, is there any end in sight for ransomware? And there is a possibility of ransomware going away. And this should be terrifying to you guys. You'll be happy because ransomware is horrible and it's a good thing if it goes away. But if there is any sort of regime change in Russia, which could happen at any time, right? Uprising, oligarchs kick that guy out and replace him with somebody else. No matter who the new regime is, better or worse, they will say all that bad stuff that happened before was the old guy's fault. And because they have to blame the war in Ukraine and the loss of hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers, they have to explain it to the populace. So that's all Putin's fault. And we're going to put him on trial and hang him, or explain why he's no longer with us. And they're also going to go to the international community and say, hey, it's a new Russia. We want to play nice. And we are going to sign, the 2001 cybercrime treaty that everybody else has already signed. And we will work with law enforcement. And of course, they'll immediately shut down all ransomware teams in Russia. That's not everybody, right? North Korea is pretty good at ransomware right now, but it'll be 90% of it, and the headlines will disappear.
Well, let's say they did do that. I mean, can we really believe that they would do that, or are they just basically shutting down the brands that we're familiar with?
It'll be cheap.
Totally, but it's
cheap
cheap
to them.
business as usual.
I want Vegas odds on that. I think I'm getting a big payout that doesn't happen.
Yes, I mean, I make the argument a lot here that that there's a subset of these ransomware attacks that are obviously serving geopolitical ambitions. They,
No question.
I mean, how many blood banks, just got attacked in the last few months? Is that a symptom of the blood banks, the nature of their business? Yes, because it's critical, right? It's even better than attacking a hospital, because you attack the regional blood supply. It's like you're attacking all the hospitals, right? So these are all things that break down our confidence in institutions, cause a lot of fear and panic amongst in headlines, right? Can we reasonably expect that even a more friendly regime in someplace like Russia is going to shut down what is a multi-billion-dollar industry for them, and they also get intelligence out of it, and they also get to flex and then use these proxies as like that plausible deniability, right? So they can just go, and to that point, I'll bring up China, which is a totally different model than the Russian model, right? But there's some similarities. But in the last year or so, we've heard a lot about the Typhoon operations, right? Volt Typhoon. What else do we have? Flax Typhoon. So Volt Typhoon and Flax Typhoon hitting critical infrastructure in the U.S. and probably allied nations. Then we've also got Salt Typhoon, which compromised the telecoms and including the communications, like these are very supposed to be very secure communications of U.S. political figures, at the time candidate Trump and Vice Presidential nominee Vance. Their communications were compromised in these attacks. When FBI Director Wray came out and talked about these very strongly in the fall, named China as the aggressor, China responded with, "Oh no, that was a ransomware. That wasn't else, right?"
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. And in China, even more than Russia, any activity is sanctioned. It has to be. Right?
oh yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, yeah, Russia's got a little more probably casual kind of relationship where they say you see anything that we would be interested in, and this goes back to the APT operations, of the last decade.
Right.
Basically, ransomware is the same thing. They just drop a encryption payload at the end of these,
Right.
what were before espionage operations, data exfiltration operations.
Yep.
So I mean, this is brazen. The FBI director came out and said,
Yeah.
"We know China did this."
Right.
Consequences, none really. I mean, all we could come at him with was PR. I'm sure in the back room, many negotiations, this comes up. But do we look ineffective? Does the U.S. government look like we really can't do anything about these attacks that have persisted now for, we're into 3 decades?
I think you're looking for the word feckless, Anthony.
Feckless, so thank you. Yes, that would have been.
Yeah. Yeah. From, speaking of history, back to Titan Rain was the very first such incursion that we noticed. And even that was handled, it was ham-fisted in the way that the FBI handled it, right? They were counterterrorism or counterespionage, so they handled it. They recruited Sean Carpenter to, do some backhacking under the umbrella of being a confidential informant. And, ultimately, Lockheed fired Sean for working with the FBI because they told him not to. And there were no repercussions for the Chinese. They just kept merrily trying to get into our research labs. So, yeah. Long
I mean, is part of the problem just the non-physical nature of this, right? Like, and people can't figure it out. I see that in the corporate world. Like, where do things cross lines? How, who's responsible for this? And I think anytime you get into IT and cyber, it becomes this ephemeral issue of like, who's responsible for it? I don't know. Like, where does it, we see this in the compliance stuff, Stacey. I'm sure you've seen it, right? With regulation and, when you start crossing boundaries in cyber, it's really hard to define stuff, right? You can just operate outside of a jurisdiction, and that presents a lot of challenges to how you address it appropriately. I think I see that on the federal side and the response side of like, yeah, like how does it connect? How does it convert into kinetic? Right? Is it, can we convert it into kinetic? Like nothing really happened. Like how do we tie the attribution back? Can we tie someone dying in a hospital actually back to a ransomware actor? Well, that's a bit vague. Like, can we or can't we? I mean, how do you see that, Richard? Is that one of the issues that we're really facing? Stacey, you too? I mean,
Yeah, for me, it's not that so much as the ability to quickly hide the responsibility for a successful attack. And if you think back to the successful attack on OPM, just swap out the people in charge of things, and now you're doing something, right? Maybe you're applying for more budget and so like OPM actually had seen these attacks and asked for $2 or $3 million more. And that when they really got hit hard. And just over and over, it's like the response is bureaucratic instead of real, right? It's and I'm thinking a real response is we shut off network access until this is fixed, right? And there's a lot of pain felt by everybody until some new controls are implemented and put in place.
Yeah.
That
They're like
that never
countries take
happens.
that approach too, and it seems to, and that's how they get efficacy with those type of, from our perspective, would be a more drastic, real approach.
Yep.
And then you mentioned things with, okay, what we typically apply sanctions, right? So sanctions. So if you're associating with Salt Typhoon or these other types of groups, okay, now you're all added to the effective, right? So these businesses, we're not are we really looking into how effective that is? Because like you're saying, maybe there are other methods and stuff that we need to take into consideration. Sorry, Richard. Go ahead.
But it'd be different if it was physical, right? Like if somebody broke into the NSA with a hammer, right? Like busted through the front door, came in, like there's going to be a little bit different response, right? Right. Versus,
You get that
you,
far, you probably get shot. So
yeah, exactly. That's my point, right? Like, yeah. Yeah, bullets downrange, kinetic, very easy to understand, right? But in a situation where somebody hacks and steals massive amounts of data that's arguably more negatively impactful to national security than someone hitting the door of the the NSA with the sledgehammer trying to walk in, the response is much different, right? Like even though it's more impactful in the end result. I mean, I just find it, and again, I've seen it on the corporate side as well, where people aren't willing to shut off ports or turn things off when they're under attack because they're afraid that real business is going to get impacted.
Yep. Yeah, I remember going into the Pentagon for the first, maybe the only time. And, it was all big debate on IDS versus IPS. But I remember talking to a team about, they wanted to have IDS so they could see if somebody was trying to hack their systems over Telnet. And I'm going, excuse me, that's one rule in a firewall, no Telnet allowed. Why are we using Telnet? And they looked at me and they said, yeah, you try telling us 2-star why he can't manage his system, on the other side of the building via Telnet. So it's just frozen in time because of a hierarchical power structure that you just can't do anything that upsets that person. So,
well, in the ransomware, I would use the analogy before that if a foreign national with any kind of ties to, let's say, a nation state intelligence apparatus or something, went into a hospital and took everybody hostage, and patients they had to cancel operations, patients couldn't get care and stuff like that. We would be talking about it a lot differently in the media and probably amongst the powers that be. Then we happen to be, it's like it's cyber. It's just like, oh, okay, well, here's some more guidelines.
right.
Maybe you should look at this framework for your operation. No, we're not going to actually pass any serious legislation to require better security or to legislate some consequences for acts like that. But it's like it's cyber. It's like
It's the psychology of the problem.
Yeah, you're totally right there. It's
I mean, with these EOs and everything that's coming out, do you think they're trying to go towards that, Anthony? Would you say trying to make that head that direction to make somebody be more accountable for all these?
I mean, I think any three of you would probably be more qualified to answer that question than me. But my opinion, it seems like we do more and more to make sure that we keep this firewall between cyber and kinetic, and we just don't want to go there. It's too unexplored. We don't want to cross that line. They didn't even come up when Colonial Pipeline happened, right? Which was pretty significant. I mean, it gives us an idea of what kind of impact they could, if they wanted to, have on our critical infrastructure. I think that was an oops. I think everybody agrees that was an oops by the threat actor, and you saw Putin came in and shut them down, dark side, really quick, right? Because it was getting him mentioned along with ransomware, by the president during a press conference with President of the United States. So that's, Putin did not want that. So it just seems like everything that we do is just trying to make sure we keep it with the DOJ, as cyber criminal matter. We're never going to acknowledge the fact that, what are all these Typhoon operations called Typhoon? Because we know they're using overlap. It's different teams with different objectives, using the same tooling, using some of the same infrastructure. We know all the operations are connected. We know, as you said, the Chinese government has to sanction pretty much anything, even if we just go in and trying to rip off gamers, on the side, or stealing some digital certificates and stuff like that from gaming platform. Everything has to be sanctioned by them. Um, is it denial, or is it caution? I don't know. I would say it's probably caution, being overly cautious.
Caution and misplaced responsibility. You know, if bureaucracies are really good at not hanging people out to dry. There's always a team that can be blamed. There's always the process that can be blamed. And the all-time favorite forever is lack of budget to be blamed. And when, so back in my youth, on the day Obama was elected, I wrote an open letter in Forbes to Obama and I just laid out my 10 points to, enhance cybersecurity in the United States. And it was all about starting with the federal government. They had, huge purchasing power, and huge IT systems that should be secured. And number one was, immediately assign somebody who was responsible for security in every single agency, right? Even today, there are only like 17 CISOs and there are over 100 agencies. So assign somebody who's got that responsibility and with real repercussions all the way up to, if they're in the military, hauling them before a military tribunal if they fail on the job, right? It's just as you would if somebody fell asleep on their post, right? They get court-martialed. Those types of repercussions should have been instituted long, long time ago. And, we just don't have that. At the very, very worst, you get hauled before Congress and lectured to by people who know even less about it than you do.
And
Right? Yeah.
yeah, I would add with that, when you're assigning the repercussions, make sure the person in that position has the authority.
Of course.
Uh,
Of course.
to
Give them
enforce.
complete authority. Yep.
And
So,
and that's kind of what I saw, because I used to work for DHS as well. Being in the government, when I would try to get certain things in place through policy, right? Because that's the only thing that we're going to be able to enforce it. If it's in policy, we can enforce it. If it's not policy, then it's just we hope that people listen and do things. That's just how it worked within the government. But I could use an official policy to get anything I needed done, right?
right.
And when talking to those that are building and developing the policies, and some of the responses on occasion would be, "Oh, we can't do that." I'm like, "But that's what you do." So I'm just like, what am I supposed to do as an employee here trying to get things done if you who have the authority to create the policy is not creating, or maybe you don't feel you have the proper authority. So making sure that that comes in so they know, okay, yes, I'm able to do these things, and I'm still a firm believer. Yes, you work with legal as well because you don't want to end up with those problems.
Right.
But yeah,
But is that not inherent if you own the risk that you then would have authority? Or or are we seeing
That's not the way it works, but that's what.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way in the corporate world either.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Yeah.
I'm tired of people getting hung out to dry. The security guy getting hung out to dry because something happened when he's advocated for additional budget for the last 10 years, headcount, like better practices. Rich, I think you called it out earlier. I forget exactly what, but you were talking about it, and I was thinking, yeah, it's always the case that it's someone in the C-suite that doesn't want to do something security related, and so they get the exception, right? And the same thing happens in the government side. I think you said like the two-star doesn't want to go across. It doesn't want to be able to not get to a system over Telnet, right? When it's a simple thing of shutting off Telnet because it shouldn't happen. The same thing in the corporate world. Oh, I don't want that policy. I don't want that blocking rule on my laptop. And then they're the person that ultimately gets compromised, but the fallback comes on the CISO or the security team. And it's just, we need to hold everyone responsible, right? I'm fond of saying it's a culture of security that we need, and it goes top to bottom.
Yeah, and a broader, even as you're talking, I'm thinking about defensive measures that quite often run up against, oh my God, we can't do that because, if you shut down a session, it could have been a real customer who's going to complain to our support group or whatever, or go off and buy from our competitor. And yet, quite often, there are defenses you should put in place when it might even be 50-50 that it's malicious. You should still stop it. And, switch the hassle away from incident response people to customer support people. And we're not there yet. We should be, but we're not there yet.
I always talked about it a while back. Go ahead, Stacey.
I said maybe leverage some of these EOs to justify this is why we're taking these drastic measures,
There
right?
you go. There you go.
So make it bring it full circle. We're gonna get things that you need a hammer, right? So leverage it.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
I'll throw this out here so we can do another segue. Supply chain attacks. You mentioned SolarWinds earlier. Obviously, Kaseya was a major one. We've seen a lot of MSPs, MSSPs getting targeted because you breach one, you breach them all. Kind of thing. It makes sense from a strategic point of view and stuff. Are we going to see the security industry, security vendors, and the larger kind of IT network infrastructure vendors getting targeted more and more? Is this or is this somewhat anomalous still, and we're not likely to see another Kaseya because there's been lessons learned?
I mean, I'm going to jump in real quick and say yes, you're going to see more. Why it's been effective, and when you find that way in, it's an easy way. So many people are unaware of third parties, these with access within their environment or the level of access, and sometimes it's almost out of sight, out of mind. It's an easy way in, so I would say it's definitely going to increase. Leveraging certain things like even within, you mentioned the executive order, talking about adding these things to contracts and what have you. A lot of these statements have already been in contracts and that has not been really working. So uh, do we come to the more realistic approach on, okay, um, what are these repercussions? What is going to happen? Where can we move responsibility and liability over to these vendors if they're not doing what they're supposed to do to make them enforce certain things on the end? So my statement, yes, absolutely, is going to keep increasing.
I had an interesting conversation on the show floor at RSA last year with the guy, a founder of an Israeli startup, and his company obviously didn't address this problem, but I told him how concerned I am about SolarWinds. And he says, yeah, we're in this unit that wasn't even 8200. It was a super secret unit in the Israeli army that, was tasked with targeting their adversaries. And he said, we didn't even scan their networks. We didn't do any reconnaissance at all other than to identify what software solutions they use. And we attacked the software supplier. That was just first step. That's the easiest way in. We're just going to get in by corrupting that software and open up a back door, and we're in. And so that is top of mind. The GRU, SRV both know about that now. Sandworm on the GRU side and SolarWinds on the SRV side. Everybody in the intelligence communities look at what each other are doing and they copy those techniques. If you think about it, just imagine in the management teams what they all thought of after the CrowdStrike blunder last year. It's like, wow.
They talk about a single point of failure.
Yeah, boy, that caused a lot of disruption. If we could get in to CrowdStrike's update network or Microsoft's update network, which is just massive amount of servers sitting somewhere in Washington, and just get in there and corrupt one. And
That's the challenge. Richard, you mentioned earlier, you said, like a company like a Lockheed, they have the means and the ability to defend, right? And that's certainly true. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I mean, I think everybody's got issues that they have to address. Nobody's perfect, but as a company like, a Lockheed certainly is up at the top, right? A Bank of America, any of the top, financial companies, like they have a really good defense in depth strategy. The challenge becomes everybody's got third parties. Everybody's got this supply chain issue. We've dealt with this for years. And, as a CISO, when you look at the supply chain issue, the challenge is it's all static information, right? It's a self-assessment that somebody does to answer a form. It's, you do a one-time evaluation. There's no live connection to see, oh, they've made a change in a setting and that's created an exposure and I need to shut off that connection with that supply chain now. And as you move down the line, even a Lockheed needs, a small security vendor to help them out because they come up with the new solutions, right? A Lockheed's more static. I'm not picking on Lockheed. I'm just using them as an example because you reference it. small security vendor, more nimble, more agile, able to come up with something to solve a unique problem. But, they're also 100 people or 200 or 300 people. They don't have the capability, the budget, and I've seen in my history, security vendors are typically horrible at this. They think, hey, we do security really well because we're a security vendor. And it's like, no, your vertical, your specific niche really, really well, but you don't understand how security programs well because you're not a Lockheed, right? Like you haven't done it. You don't have a CISO that's like had holistic experience across the industry. And so that's the challenge. And I think that is a risk that every company faces, is the long tail of that third party. And we talk about a third party, but it's third, fourth, fifth ad infinitum party, right? It's just on down the chain.
Third-party providers have third-party providers, right? And
Yeah.
so as our last best Sam Curry said, it's a supply matrix, not chain, right? It's
Good
not
point.
linear.
My favorite example, once again, and this is what led me to understand what was going on at Lockheed, was that RSA, the security division of EMC, was attacked in May of 2010 via a healthcare benefits provider who was in long discussions with a team of people at RSA. And the attack started when the attackers got into the email server and corrupted a spreadsheet with a backdoor and a rat. And that was delivered to 11 people within RSA. 2 people opened that spreadsheet, and that led to the infamous attack on RSA. Luckily, they did have, a SOC and a CISO, and they, in early morning conversation with the team, so one person saw something weird on a server, somebody else saw something weird in the network, caused them to shut everything down and do the incident response and figure out that, China had been hacking them and did succeed in exfiltrating the secret seeds to the RSA secure ID token, which is like the most academically targeted security device ever, right? There are papers and papers on how can I possibly extract the secret seed, hopefully without destroying the RSA secure ID token. These attackers figured out, why don't I just steal them, right? It's probably just sitting in a spreadsheet somewhere, which I'm afraid it was. And what got my attention was that RSA went on the road, explained to all their customers, we're really sorry that you have to replace all of these thousands of devices we sold you. And they said publicly to the SEC that not to worry, that this could be used to attack somebody who's just totally non-conceivable. A month later, Lockheed Martin recognized when somebody was using a spoofed RSA secure ID token to log in remotely. And they saw it and they shut down all remote access instantly. And that's what perked me up. How the hell can anybody do that? Turns out that they track attack teams in their activities every day and report internally on each of those teams. Whatever typhoon level is in there, they're tracking their activity. And when somebody tried to log in at a certain time of a certain person's credentials, they could associate that with the attacker and shut everything down. It's just brilliant. But look at how they had to go through 2 different suppliers to finally get to the target.
Or just more evidence that with enough time, resources, motivation, right?
Yep. And then of course I'm often say, look, you can spend as much as Lockheed does, but have you also accounted for the fact that a foreign agent could fly over and either kidnap your kids or bribe you into giving up the keys, right? It's probably doesn't cost as much.
Right. Well, speaking of vendors, if I were a threat actor and I wanted to look at a compendium of all the cybersecurity vendors, what book might you recommend that I go purchase?
Or what application could I hack?
There you go. So amongst your authoring, you took on a huge project, which is basically to map the entire cybersecurity space. Oh, and look at this.
Yep. Oh, look at that. Yep.
Studies
See,
your work.
perfect. It's good for you.
So I remember when you launched this project, it was just it was huge.
Yeah.
It consumed you. Now probably maybe hopefully a little bit easier to
Yeah.
maintain and
Consumes me
to
for
build that personal.
a month every year now. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but tell us a little bit about the security yearbook, what it is, what kind of information's in it. Tell us a little bit about the genesis of the project.
Yeah. So I had written a book for Jay Chaudhry and was signing it in his booth at RSA 2019 and going, wow, this is great. There's people lined up across the show floor to come get a free book signed by the author. I need a book for next year. And a bunch of the people coming up to me would say, oh, this is so great. This is my second week on the job. And my boss said I should go to RSA to learn about the security industry. And that's when it hit me. It's like, well, that's not a good way to learn about the security industry, right? It's just a flood of information and you'll come away.
Words.
Yeah, you'll come away thinking that XDR is everything. And then the next year you discover, no, it was AI. I missed it. So that was the genesis of the book. I wanted to write a history of our industry. Looked into it. There are no other histories of the industry. There's plenty of histories of hacking, great books on major hacking events and great histories of cryptography. But, nobody's talked about the mundane, firewalls and antivirus and how we got to where we are today. So I started interviewing all the pioneers of the industry that are still with us. Was looking back on it, and the 2021 version included the story of Amit Iran. I'm so happy that I got that. I've got Eva Chen's story. I've got Gil Schwed, founder of Checkpoint's story. And then I weave that around, an analyst view of how the industry got to where it is today. And it's, it looks like a big fat book. But only half of it is actually my writing. And the other half is a directory of all the vendors that I've been researching for 18 years now. And I publish those, alphabetically, so you look them up, and by category and by country and state in the U.S. And so if you're writing if you're a journalist and you're writing about your state's cybersecurity programs, you can look it up, and you got all 34 cybersecurity vendors, and you go talk to them and understand that basic, just from the basic levels, how important cybersecurity is to your state and the economy. And then, I'll publish the numbers by state, for instance. So we know California, of course, leads dramatically, but the DC area is number 2, not Boston or New York City or Atlanta. And it's just a wealth of knowledge in there. And every year I just update it with what happened the previous year, what are the major events to look at. And this coming edition, which is already put to bed, has got the Cyber 150 in it. It's got the Fast 50. So a little more interesting things to follow year to year. So it turns it literally into a yearbook. So you want to collect them all. And unfortunately, you no longer can, because when Wiley took over publication and for this last version, the one you've got, Stacey, they made me destroy all the old versions. So there aren't any. So the collector's items, if you see one.
Oh,
Of course, you buy them for about $5 on Amazon used books. So
I'm glad I already got my copy.
yeah.
Now, I might have put a few people out of work.
I mean, I think and I just got mine a few days ago,
Oh, cool.
and I've already gone through several aspects of it. I love how it's organized. I can target specific areas that I want to look into. So, of course, I'm like, oh, good, I'm talking with Richard coming up. Let me go, this whole GRC section. Let's go see what's in here. And I'm like, oh, we think alike on this aspect. And
Awesome.
and I just love your approach to risk management, because not everyone takes that same approach from that aspect. As far as, are we truly doing risk management? Different ways to look at identifying, the traditional approaches of identifying assets and criticality is not necessarily the best method of being able to do risk management and quantify it. So, but yeah, so I actually really like it. Anthony's the one that told me about your book, and I was excited to get into it. And of course, I looked to make sure Halcyon was in the back, and we're listed in the directory, which we're awesome. But I mean, I think it's a really, it's definitely really great. It's a good, it's a reference book. It's a, a tutorial. It's a, yeah. So
Cool.
thank-
Thank you so much for that accolade.
I mean, what a left. I can remember it's a pre-COVID at about the peak of the RSA conference. So maybe it's 2018, 2019. I remember coming down the escalators and there was one of the placards there and it said new vendors, right? So draw attention to them to
Right.
go, and it had like 65
Yeah.
startups named. And that was just the ones coming in the first time appearing at, tabletop size. Maybe if they're on fire, they had a
Yeah.
booth.
Like the sandbox. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, 65 new ones
Yeah.
on top of the ones that were just 2-3 years old, in their BC
Yep. Well,
kind of that growth.
so some numbers. First of all, we track 4,080 vendors. Every year about 300 are acquired. So, 8 or 9% of the entire space, turns over every year. And every year, there are 300 to 400 new funding rounds. So that's all vibrant. And there are many that go out of business, but mostly there were only 2 people, maybe 1 person, and they just decide to do something else. Not like abject failures, which I do track in the book, when there are major failures.
You got Norse in there? I decided to ask you.
Yeah, oh yeah, big time. That's why there's a chapter.
It was
There's
a
a
period of my
Yeah,
life.
yeah. The Norse and then Iron Net was it last year?
Yep.
Yeah. But the one thing that's hard to track is each year is how many startups were there this year. That's really difficult to do because I don't discover a startup until a year or 2 years after they launch. After their, founders got together, they created a website, but they're still stealthy. But if you look back historically to like 2017 and 2018, there were over 200 of today's vendors that were founded back then in that year. And, so that doesn't include the guys that already got bought, so there could easily be 300 or 400 new vendors started every year.
Now, because you did start this before the post-COVID market during where the IPO window closed. It's still they're arguing whether or not it's closed. We saw one very successful IPO in space recently. We saw another one that was flat. So the indications we don't really know yet. But you said 200 to 300, excuse me, funding rounds. Did you see a dip? Has there been? Yeah. How did you see that VC pullback and the market shift kind of impact? The trends that you were seeing before when everything was on fire.
Yeah, so obviously 21 was the all-time record, 24 billion in investment. The next year was 17 billion, and then it collapsed in 23 to only 10 billion invested, which is better than 2019, or equal to 2019, but it was all caused by the Silicon Valley Bank run on that bank and the collapse of the bank. The investors not only told their portcos to stop spending money and extend their runway, but they took that to heart themselves and they stopped spending money and stopped investing. Even though every one of us learns on our father's knee to buy low and sell high, when the market's down, the venture capitalists don't invest. I don't know why. It's crazy. Because at least in security, the demand's not going to go away, right? Unless Russia has a regime change, as I've talked about. But next year there'll be more need for security than this year for sure. So why not invest in a company that could pay off in 5 to 10 years while the market's low and the founders are happy to take your money for a lower valuation? It would have been great, but nope, they pulled back. And by the way, they stopped spending money on data sources like mine. So they all turned here in the U.S. In Europe, the venture capitalists take a different approach.
Well, aside from the impact on your revenue streams, Do you think we kind of needed this? Did we need a break? Did we need kind of a pause?
Yeah.
We this is going crazy.
Yeah,
Oh,
2021 was a bubble, and so so it's been a healthy pause, I guess. I know because I attempt to use headcount as a proxy for revenue, and if you got to guess at what the revenue per employee is, you can do that. But it's really difficult when a company like Wiz or Sierra takes in $100 million every 6 months to attribute that headcount growth to revenue at all, right? They could just be totally pulling the wool over our eyes as far as their success. So after this period, there's a very, very close coupling between headcount and revenue, right? Nobody hires a single person unless their revenue can justify that hire. That's for now. Things will heat up again. They always do. And we'll be back in the overvaluation and overspending and overhiring phase once again. But for now, we're at a steady state, which is good.
Do you think, and this is a question for all three of you to chime in on. I mean, we were in a hyper growth period. Was hyper growth obviously good for investors, not necessarily good for our industry or what our actual objectives are? Of course, we're all running businesses and we want them to be successful, and we can't. I mean, we're in a free market system. This is how business works, right? But all of us are also very, very passionate about what we do in security. Nobody gets. I don't know anybody that got into security because they just thought they could make a fast buck, right? For the most part.
Yeah.
So
I know some people that did, Anthony.
didn't really have a passion for it.
You just got to look at the investment community. Yeah.
Investors.
Well, I mean, that's a different aim because their business is investing, where it's not security, right? I know that a lot of people are miserable because they love being in security.
Yeah, but even as there was a time, I think the bubble was big, right? And it was seen as an industry where a lot of money could be made, salaries were kind of crazy, right? And so I think a lot of people jumped into it, not necessarily because they were passionate, but it was, I can make good money here, right? And I think the people who were passionate stayed in it, and some of those people found out that it's not as easy to get an entry level job in security making $250,000 a year, right? Right. Those just don't exist. You need to have some talent. So, but yeah, sorry, back to your point.
Yep.
Oh yeah, no,
Is it good? You were asking, is it good? Is it good for the growth? Was the growth good for investors? Was it good for the industry? Yes. I'm a firm believer that yes, I think the growth is good for the industry. Because, being a scientist background, that aspect of it, computer scientist, I don't mess with that. But that aspect of it is it's going to drive innovation. It's going to drive competition. It's going to some people will succeed, some people will not succeed. But to me, all those, you still learn from all those aspects, and I think it can only continue to help the industry to grow.
Yeah, do we get the best products the way this structure is set up? Going out and fishing for money to be able to grow and develop, or are we missing some innovation because the VCs have to make a choice, right? Who they're going to invest in, and they typically end up doubling down on those investments as their companies grow. And so that kind of closes the door for others if they miss the opportunity, if they weren't as good as, let's say, pitching their ideas or presenting their solutions.
I'm going to say it's a mixed bag, but I know Richard was about to say something. So
Yeah, because I said, well, hey, I've got data between 2021 and 2022. There are 406 cybersecurity companies founded. So if you ask yourself, well, who were some of those, and was that valuable to have that much money out there? You might want to look at Sandbox AQ, right? So founded with $500 million in startup capital as a spinoff from Google. They seem to be doing okay, and they're fighting the good battle, right? They're getting people to actually look at their encryption and get quantum prepared. Phantom, Scrut Automation, Upwind, Doppel, fastest growing company of their size last year. So yeah, I think it was a great time for all these companies to start. Hidden Layer, Endor Labs, Grip, all those companies started in that time frame.
You might have to add an appendix or another section though. Where are they now? Right.
Yeah, well,
because of all the acquisitions.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do with the Cyber 150 is track them over time, see what happens to them.
Well, this is we've blown out an hour, so I don't want to get too over. Richard, fantastic conversations. If people are interested in this the cybersecurity yearbook, right, or your other books that we mentioned, they'll be linked in the blog that I'm promoting out here. But where can they find you? Where can they find this information? Where can they get more?
Yeah, so the best way to start is just find me on LinkedIn, and I do a pretty good job of making sure everybody knows what I'm doing there. So feel free to follow me or connect directly if you want. Unless you say that you're a blockchain expert in your tight areas, then I will not connect with you.
Stacey, you're off the list. You're off the list now, Stacey. He won't connect with you because you're a blockchain expert. I saw that addition.
Oh my god! Delete.
Again, Richard, for your time. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Stacey, for joining. Wonderful to see you. Appreciate all the knowledge that you've dropped, and everybody, please go check out his books. Fantastic resource.